Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're seeing some shift in the fight around the Syrian border town of Kobani, and we're asking whose boots on the ground going forth. Turkey this Monday saying yes to Iraqi Kurds helping in the fight, no to Syrian Kurds. With us to talk about it from Istanbul, Akin Hunver, who teaches international relations at Kadir Has University. Here in the studio, William Jordan, former U.S. diplomat stationed in part of your time in Syria. Julien Théron, who teaches political science at the University of Paris at Versailles. And from London, Jim Brand of the Stop the War Coalition. We were talking before the break about ISIS's aims and how Turkey's been handling them. The Turks forbidding Syrian Kurds from using their side of the border as a rear base. But the reality on the ground is a border that's, well, been wide open to ISIS militants joining the other side. Luke Brown tells the story.
A high vantage point along the Turkey-Syria border. The other side of this railway line is Syria. These four men have just changed from military fatigues into jihadist attire. Crossing the frontier and into Islamist-controlled areas is as simple as walking through this passage. It's all witnessed by the TV crew and locals gathered on this hill, as well as Turkish border outposts who do nothing to intervene. Inside Syria itself, Kurdish Syrian fighters do open fire to applause from the partisan crowds. Until, that is, the jihadists' own positions return fire, with some of the bullets headed towards the onlookers in Turkey. Within minutes, the four Islamist fighters rejoin their comrades safely inside jihadist-held territory.
Akin Hunver, those images were filmed on October the 1st. Would you say that it's going to be a different situation going forth now at the border?
I presume, there will be a lot of Peshmerga influx into Kobani, and basically Turkish military allowing Kurds from northern Iraq actually coming in to reinforce Kurdish positions, the Syrian Kurds in Kobani. So we basically see that the reason why this reinforcement is happening is because ISIS is actually reinforcing its positions from other territories. So I think basically right now there's a huge proxy war of sorts happening in Kobani. On the one hand, Turkey's position seems to be let's not let Kobani fall, but on the other hand, let's not grant the Kurds a huge victory over ISIL. It's basically this dog-eat-dog kind of situation in which Turkey is comfortable with both the Kurds and ISIL weakening each other.
It's a lot of reactions again coming in. Mixa saying, let Wahhabi, in parentheses, Saudi boots on the ground, clean up their own mess. They just might implode. The Saudis, who are alongside the United States now in that coalition to take on the jihadists. Jim Brand, when you take a look at the situation, there is no good solution, obviously. But what do? Do you let the jihadists run rampant?
Well, there's so many oddities that if you look at different people's positions, they're just full of contradictions. But for example, the British, the French and others are bombing in Iraq, but not in Syria. And they say this is in support of the Iraqi government. But the Iraqi government says that a key missing player in the equation is Iran, because clearly if the problem is ISIS, then clearly Iran is a major country in the region. But Iran is by and large excluded from the various talks, the coalition and so on. So if the issue is ISIS, if that's really the solution and that's what they're trying to do, then they would calm the situation down, maximize the involvement of all the parties that might have a genuine say in the matter. But because I think fundamentally the various operatives are still working on the same old plan, for example, they have declared that the Assad government must go, and that's actually a fundamental of what they're doing. So whatever they say they're doing about ISIS has to also relate to getting rid of the Assad government. Because that remains the strategy in the background, because actually there are other things that are really more important to the major players.
Julien Théron, before the break, was saying, Jim, that he regrets the fact that there wasn't a decisive decision either way to try to take on Assad earlier by the coalition. Do you agree that if Assad was no longer in power, we wouldn't have these problems?
No, I don't think so. And I think that it turns out that the Assad government is not the regime that they painted. They thought it would very quickly collapse, that it was fragile, and so on. And clearly that's not true. And it has to be said very clearly that it's not for these outside powers to declare who should and should not be the legitimate government of Syria. That has to remain a principle of international relations. And it's interesting, for example, that the Arab League, which has as its fundamental principle the defense of sovereignty, that's why it was set up in 1945 or so, now it takes a position on who is and is not a legitimate ruler within the Arab world. And it's that problem of breaking the bounds of international relations that I think is a central factor of this present crisis.
Julien Théron?
Yeah, well, the regime completely collapsed, actually. They still stand on a very small part of the territory, the useful Syria, as we used to say. But really, it's about Hezbollah and Iranian Al-Quds brigades who are advising and backing, militarily speaking, the regime. That's why they are still there. Let's have a glance on the situation. Iranians are in Iraq and in Syria. Lebanese Hezbollah is in Syria. Now we are making the Iraqi Kurds in Syria. Is it a good idea? I mean, we are really mixing the cards now. We are not trying to find a global solution. We are just arming different groups and using the ones and so on. And we were saying that, yeah, well, you were right when you were saying that there is a civil war in Syria. But in Iraq, I would actually call that a kind of civil war as well. I mean, the Shia militias fighting the Sunnis who are inside the Islamic State and the Kurds and so on.
You're saying you need a global solution. One comment coming in on Twitter, there's no choice but to coordinate with Assad in the short term. Is Assad part of that global solution?
Well, I don't know. I'm not in command.
No.
But I think that, for instance, you were saying that Iran is not invited to the round tables and so on. I think it should be the case. I mean, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran are the main global regional actors, I mean.
Well, I think one of the biggest problems now, and this has kind of been talked about to various degrees by different people tonight, is that, you know, this inherent resolve operation is basically come together to be focused on the Islamic State. But the issues, I mean, the reality that everybody needs to be trying to grapple with is much larger than the Islamic State. It has to do fundamentally with the Syrian civil war. It has to do with the sort of incipient or always possible civil war in Iraq. It has to do with you know, these three distinct pieces. You know, the Islamic State, in my view, is in many ways the smallest piece of all of this. It has become most important because it has made itself a factor by what it has done in Iraq.
Well, it's captured the country's second largest city. It's got vast swathes of territory.
It has surprised everybody by totally fragilizing the Iraqi state. It has also made itself a global terrorist threat by virtue of what it's been able to do locally with international citizens, such as the journalists and aid workers, whom it's executed and others who it continues to hold in captivity. It has aspirations beyond the area, and it is providing safe haven for al-Qaeda-linked groups, but it is not fundamentally about the Islamic State or all of these terrorist groups. It is fundamentally about the nation states in the region. It is about the civil war that has been going on in Syria. It is about those two things, and this is one of the problems with the coalition. As all of this has come together, this coalition has come together to deal with the Islamic State. But all of the members of this coalition dealing with the other associated issues are in no way on the same page.
Yeah, but you were speaking about nation state, and for Syria, I kind of agree because there's a really historical background on that. But regarding to Iraq, it's mainly a kind of a myth that the Brits tried to make a raise, and actually even Saddam Hussein couldn't make it real.
Well, I fundamentally disagree with you on that. And I don't think we have the time tonight to have a historical debate over Syria and Iraq. But I mean, you know, there are a lot of things that are at play here. But what everybody is focusing on now is principally the Islamic State and the menace that it poses. But the coalition, as in my view, is fundamentally incapable of dealing with the comprehensive questions that are there. Hence, the idea of having some kind of an orchestrated, comprehensive conference or meeting of some sort to deal with this is absolutely out of the question right now. And so it is down to this whatever works to deal with the immediate threat, which, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, if it involves non-state actors, so what? It's, you know, it involves whoever can sort of stop the IS in its tracks right now, deal with that in the hope that we can then deal with the other issues.
That brings us back to the question I put to you in part one. Akin Hunver, since there's been this fighting in Kobani within plain sight of the Turkish border, we've seen huge outcry on the part of Turkey's sizable Kurdish community, 37 killed. And our correspondent says a lot of those killed is not at the hands of riot police, but by Islamists in Turkey picking up weapons and taking on Kurdish supporters in the streets of Turkey. Again, I ask you, at this point in time, is public opinion changing in Turkey?
Well, when you say Islamists in Turkey doing this, I mean, this needs a lot of qualification, because the Islamists that you're talking about are actually a very specific local radical organization called the Turkish Hezbollah, which is very loosely related to the original Hezbollah that we know. Turkish Hezbollah was very active in the 1990s. Right now, it transformed itself into a political party of sorts with a little bit militant street youth base. So when we say Islamists in Turkey, it's actually a very localized, very small, territorial group that actually have done these killings. While on the other hand, yes, you have some killings on the part of riot police or, emergency military deployments as well. So one thing I should basically, clarify is that Islam is a huge concept, whereas, those who were killing the Kurds that rioted are actually, a tiny minority in Turkey. But coming to your question, I mean, is Turkish public opinion changing? I mean, no. I think those who oppose ISIL remain the same. Those who fear the ISIL remain the same. But, hardcore Islamists who basically espouse this jihadi ideology in Turkey, which is, I think, 15 to 10% of Turkish society, I think they just get more vocal as they see ISIL gains and victories. So I don't think there's anything changing. But Islamists in Turkey that basically espouse with this jihadi ideology get emboldened more, and they basically raise their volume more in that sense.
All right, the commander of the anti-ISIS coalition last week warning Kobani could still fall to the jihadists, but the battle is helping, in the larger sense, to borrow Barack Obama's words, to degrade the jihadists' strength.
In the Kobani area is that, in my assessment, the enemy has made a decision to make Kobani his main effort. And what you've seen him do in the last several days is continue to pour manpower into that effort. Now, my goal is to defeat and ultimately destroy ISIL. And if he continues to present us with major targets, as he has done in the Kobani area, then clearly we'll service those targets, and we've done so very, very effectively here of late, as you've mentioned. But again, the more we attrit him in Kobani, the less ability he has to reinforce efforts in other places.
Julien Théron, I'm a little puzzled by that statement. First of all, because we're seeing reports that elsewhere, especially in Iraq's Anbar province, that the jihadists continue to prove not only their resilience, but they're making gains. Secondly, airstrikes. There haven't been that many of them. When you look, 6 in the last 24 hours in Syria, 6 in the last 24 hours in Iraq. When you look at previous bombing campaigns in Iraq and former Yugoslavia, these are very small numbers.
Well, the idea of a part of the success of Islamic State is actually that they went on the ground regarding to Al-Qaeda. The point is that now that they are attacked with a regular warfare, they are spreading a little bit in the cities, a little bit everywhere. So it's very hard to get the intel to get them. It's very necessary to go military, I mean. But I don't think it's contradictory with the kind of regional settlement. But yes, it's completely needed, and I think that we are not helping the situation in the region. I think that targeting only the Islamic State won't make it better. It's actually favor as well Hezbollah on one side, which is actually considered as a terrorist organization as well. The PKK, which is considered as a terrorist
organization. So are you saying that the coalition should also be targeting who?
I think that it's important to go to treat the emergencies, militarily speaking, but I think that there's absolutely no view about a political settlement in the region. Barack Obama said that we have to work with the Syrian moderates and so on. Well, who they are, we still don't know.
Jim Brand, do you agree? You have to put out the fire and you have to have airstrikes in the short run and then work on a political solution for the longer term.
There are, if you look at the statements, if you look at the statement of the general just there that you showed, you see one of the fundamental contradictions in what the leading players say. Because he was talking about an enemy, ISIS, operating on a broad front who's capable of focusing on one strategic point, which is Kobani, over the broad expanse of half of Syria and a third of Iraq, who is in every way a coordinated player. And then you have the statement of CIA, for example, that they estimate that the fighting strength of ISIS is between 20 and 31,000. So quite a specific figure. And then you have this statement of, I think it was the Director of National Intelligence, saying we basically have no idea what their command structure is, so that they can present the ISIS thing in quite different ways to different audiences. And it's that lack of basic information that we're facing, that you can present. For example, David Cameron said that the reason that Britain has to get involved is because if we don't, there will be, as he put it, a fascist state on the borders of the Mediterranean next to a NATO member. And the NATO member he's talking about is Turkey. But if you listen to what Erdogan says about ISIS, he says, no, at the very least, it's just it's just another component of a terrorist threat, which includes the PKK. So in a sense, in Erdogan's words, ISIS is kind of equal to the PKK. So you really can't square what the different people say, and you have to be very wary, I think.
All right.
I agree with this, Francois, and part of this is the sense that this is a conflict that's playing out under a microscope, especially the conflict in Kobani. I mean, and one of the problems...
From television cameras.
Exactly. One of the problems that I think everybody trying to assess and explain what's going on is that this is happening in real time. We don't really have all of the information. We see the images. We have a vague appreciation. Meanwhile, you look at what's going on in Al-Anbar, and I think that it is potentially less, whatever the Islamic State is doing in Al-Anbar may have less to do with the effectiveness of the Islamic State forces and have more to do with the ineffectiveness and the continued muddle among Iraqi forces to be able to counter them.
All right, but could there be a change of on that score? What with the Iraqi Prime Minister going to Tehran this Monday? There was a deal over the weekend to complete that unity government. It includes the head of the powerful Shiite Badr organization as interior minister and a prominent Sunni lawmaker as defense minister.
Potentially. I mean, there's another drama that's playing out that's not been getting as much attention. I think the Wall Street Journal did an article over the weekend about an effort to try to create a national guard in Iraq as a way to try to bring Sunnis and others into the security forces. I mean, this is sort of maybe a new way to revive the idea of the the Sahwa, the tribal forces that formed a sort of militia during the American occupation,
and that worked with the Americans.
Right, but right now it is getting bogged down in the minutia of the very difficult Iraqi internal political situation. So it's all very, very murky. But I would not expect to see signs of an immediate turnaround, except potentially in the north, where because the Peshmerga are a potent fighting force. If they are well equipped and they are well motivated, they could actually, as they have been doing, make gains around Anbar and around Baghdad. I would expect still to see some time before
it's going to take a while. Akin Unver, seen from Istanbul, very briefly. Are things moving? Are things changing?
I mean, I would say no, because for Turkey still, ISIL remains just a product and not the reason, not the cause. And I have to add to the debate that happened before me is that, Ankara really sees ISIL as a sociology. I mean, these people are used to basically being bombed for the last decade, and further bombing will not help if you don't have a longer-term strategy. And that longer-term strategy seems to be letting ISIL walk away with at least something, maybe much less than what it has at this point, but basically, squeezing Assad further south in Syria, enabling, I don't know, a cordon sanitaire, a safe zone in the north, and basically letting ISIL have, a little portion of Iraq and Syria, right, and basically try to deal with it as a sociology.
All right, so the bargaining continuing in Baghdad and the bargaining continuing between Ankara and the rest of the coalition. I want to thank you, Akin Unver, for joining us from Istanbul. I want to thank Jim Brand in London, our guests here in the studio, William Jordan and Julien Théron. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. Got on this.
All right. A rather strange story that did the rounds of the internet this weekend from the Place Vendôme, François, in central Paris. Paris's tree art installation provokes uproar. So this was one of the stories that went viral over the weekend. It was meant to be a Christmas tree, but some people thought it looked like a sex toy. That's what the headlines were saying. And the artist, who is in the business of doing provocative sculptures, this is what he does, François, and this was for the Paris Art Fair, the Contemporary Art Fair. He was beaten up on Place Vendôme on last Thursday. This is after the sculpture was put up. And just to read an explanation of what happened, it was 2 in the afternoon. He was surveying the completed work. An unknown assailant accosted Paul McCarthy, is his name, allegedly screaming that his sculpture did not belong on the Place Vendôme before hitting him in the face at least 3 times. He was apparently additionally upset by the fact that McCarthy is not French. So it had all the components, I suppose, for going viral. French bashing, another sort of definition of it. That night, the art installation was actually unplugged, or it was deflated. Punctured is the word, exactly. And just yesterday, in the final what would you say, installation, or in this trilogy, as some people are saying it, it was withdrawn. So it was actually, there's no point in even trying to fix it. So the vernissage was meant to be this evening. Some were quipping online that Paul McCarthy probably feels a little deflated at his vernissage, and lots of other images doing the rounds saying that he's, that this is not the first time that he's done this, and even a fake Bring Back Our Sculpture campaign, which is probably about as tasteless as the art installation itself. We'll also be looking at 2 more sculptures, this time in China, robotic sculptures, and I think we have the images. This was to commemorate the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between France and China. That dragon that you see there is called like it's like long ma, made in Nantes in the west of France by a company called La Machine. So it's French flair, I suppose, combined with Chinese mythology and culture. That's the idea, and that's a spider as well, which is part of the same installation. They did battle at the Olympic Stadium in Beijing over the weekend. So lots of strange headlines trying to sum up that clash of the Titans in Beijing.
Who won, the spider or the dragon?
I'm not sure, actually. Probably the dragon, I'd imagine. Easier to squash the spider. But anyway, so there you go. Lots of sculptures of all kinds in doing the rounds of social media this weekend.
All right, Art Topical this Monday with the inauguration of a new contemporary art museum in Paris.
Absolutely.
James Creedon, many thanks for that. I want to thank our panel. Thank you for being with us here at the France 24 debate.
Beyond Business.
Successful startups are crucial for a healthy economy, but they need money to grow, and attracting investments is easier said than done. In the next Beyond Business, we look at how startups can get the money they need to succeed.
Beyond Business, en France 24, en France24.com.